Taoiseach, I want to raise with you this morning some comments by the outgoing financial regulator, which I believe have not got the attention that they deserve so far. During a recent appearance before the Public Accounts Committee, Matthew Elderfield called for a review of Ireland's regime for dealing with white-collar crime. I fully support that call. And to be absolutely clear, Taoiseach, I am not looking for a response on any specific investigation. I am highlighting the need to improve our system. Mr Elderfield said he believes our system for dealing with white-collar crime in Ireland is not working sufficiently well, and he advocated that a review would be carried out by someone such as a retired judge, a former Attorney General, or perhaps by the PAC committee itself. This, in my view, is an important intervention from someone who is respected and Taoiseach, who has seen in close quarters the inadequacies of our existing system in Ireland. There is a sense, Taoiseach, that if you're an ordinary Joe in Ireland and you transgress the law, if you don't pay the TV licence, if you don't pay the property tax or petty theft, then the wheels of justice move pretty efficiently, and there's a good chance that you will be caught and you will be punished. But if you're involved in white-collar crime, the wheels of justice are extremely slow and very often come to a grinding halt. Official figures from the CSO back this up, that recorded white-collar offences are increasing, but conviction rates are plummeting. Just as in the case of a burglary or an assault, there are real victims in the case of white-collar crime too. In many cases, victims of such crimes have had their lives destroyed, especially financially, and not to mention the damage done to our economy and indeed the reputation of this country as a place to do business. I believe, Taoiseach, that a comprehensive review of how we deal with white-collar crime in this country is needed and is needed now. It would need to examine, for example, the effectiveness of existing laws, the way we investigate white-collar crime, the powers and expertise available to the Garda Bureau of Fraud Investigation and the Director of Corporate Enforcement, the issue of penalties and the issue of specialist juries possibly as well.
Thank you, Deputy.
I believe that all of the justifiable anger about recent revelations needs to be converted into something positive. And Taoiseach, I am asking you this morning, will the Government consider appointing a qualified and experienced person to carry out a review of our regime dealing with white-collar crime to see how it can be improved?
McGrath and Taoiseach.
Yes, I do agree that we need to examine how we deal with white-collar crime in this country. I think it is fair to say that many people are very frustrated at how slowly the wheels of justice turn in many of the areas of white-collar crime. Some of that, I think, is understandable because, of course, what's being investigated very often in white-collar crime involves files and records and all kinds of complex documentation, which, of course, has to be examined and a case made ready for prosecution. But there is, I believe, certainly a well-founded view among the public that if you commit a white-collar crime, that you're not as susceptible to justice as if you commit what is often referred to as ordinary crime. And yes, the Government will consider what the former financial regulator, the outgoing financial regulator, has to say on this matter and will respond to it. But I want to say this, that should not be and is not a substitute for dealing with the issues of white-collar crime which are currently under investigation and which have to be brought to justice. I don't want anybody to be under the illusion or under the idea that we're going to have some kind of a large overall examination of white-collar crime and that this is something for the long, distant future. There are issues that are under investigation. There are some issues which are before the court that I don't want to comment on for obvious reasons. So an examination of how we deal with white-collar crime in this country, of getting a regime which operates more quickly, which delivers justice and fairness in a more effective way and in a way that is more transparent is, I believe, something that we need to address. But that examination and that consideration of the overall question of white-collar crime must not be seen as a substitute or a replacement for what is also required, which is the pursuit and the prosecution of white-collar criminality, which is currently under investigation.
So thank you for your reply, which I largely welcome, and I was very clear that my comments were not directed in any way at the current investigations. And you're correct in saying there is already a substantial body of law there, investigations are underway, and offences will have to be dealt with through the criminal justice system. That is taken as a given. The issue I am raising is following up from the significant intervention by the outgoing financial regulator, Matthew Ellerfield, who has a lot of experience now of dealing with this in Ireland over recent years. And he has pointed to the inadequacies of our existing system. And I welcome the fact that you are going to take up the issue, Taoiseach, and I would ask you to elaborate. How will that happen? Will this issue now be discussed by government, and will there be a structure put in place whereby the entire regime in all of its facets can be properly examined quickly, and recommendations made that the government and this House can consider? Because the bottom line, as I said earlier on, is that white-collar crimes are not victimless crimes by any means. They mightn't be as obvious to the eye as some of the ordinary crimes that you described, but there are real consequences for ordinary people and for people directly affected by white-collar crimes, and we have to bear that in mind. And if our system is inadequate, as in the view of the outgoing financial regulator and Deputy Governor of the Central Bank, then we need to sit up and take notice of that. So what I'm asking you, Taoiseach, is will this issue be discussed by government quickly, and in what format, and what would you envisage the outcome of that discussion would be? Will it be to have a specific review of all of the aspects that we have discussed here this morning?
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach.
Well, I think we need to take into account that the government, of course, has already been taking action in this area. When this government came to office in 2011, we inherited what was known as the light touch regulation regime. This was the regime which applied under the previous government, where there was, as it was indeed boasted about by members of that government at various times, that there was light touch regulation. That has been greatly changed. Indeed, there is a bill before the Dáil this morning, the Central Bank Regulation and Enforcement Bill, which is about tightening the regulatory regime which applies, for example, in the financial institutions. So the first thing I think that we have to acknowledge is that the government has already tightened and strengthened the regulatory regime in the financial services area. The financial regulator, the outgoing financial regulator, worked to strengthen the regulatory regime in the financial services. He is somebody that is greatly respected by the government, and what he has had to say in a wider sense, both about regulation and about white-collar crime, is something that is, of course, taken seriously by the government. We will, in the first instance, consider what he's had to say and the recommendations that he's had to make. How we progress that, it may well be that we choose to progress it maybe through discussion at an Oireachtas committee to refine some ideas, but that's something that we will have to give some consideration to. But I want to assure you that, yes, this is a government that believes in strong and appropriate regulation of our financial services, that does believe that, yes, we have to have fairness applying in our judicial system, and there cannot be a perception that there is a slower course of justice, that there's a slow track when it comes to white-collar crime as distinct from other forms of criminality. That is something that we've already taken some steps on, and certainly will take on board what the outgoing financial regulator has had to say about it.
Margaret Taoiseach, and now calling Deputy Mary Lou McDonald.
Taoiseach, this morning, on foot of parliamentary questions put by my colleague Pearse Doherty, we have further revelations about the Anglo tape controversy. We know that the Gardaí in 2010 seized significant quantities of electronic and hard copy documents and recordings in respect of 18 employees of the bank whose lines were recorded. The Central Bank, as it turns out, was unaware of the existence of these tapes. Your government, now in office almost 2.5 years, were unaware of these tapes, and indeed the public were unaware of their existence until the tapes were leaked by the media. Several parties seem to have had access to the tapes. So It seems that we are to remain in the dark until further tapes are leaked to the media and reported there. It seems to me, Taoiseach, inconceivable that senior management in Anglo didn't know about these tapes, given that the Gardaí sought and secured court orders for these tapes in 2010. And let's remember that Alan Dukes was appointed as a public interest director to the bank as early as December 2008. By the way, by 2010 he was being paid the handsome sum of €127,000 for his troubles. He became chairperson of the bank, as you know, in 2010. Of course, he wasn't the only political appointment to the bank. Former Fianna Fáil Senator Aidan Eames was appointed to the board in June of 2010 by the last Fianna Fáil government. The central bank, now that it knows about the tapes, views them as serious and are investigating these matters to assess whether there were regulatory breaches. But the Public Interest Director didn't inform the central bank at the time. That's Alan Dukes. It seems that neither he nor Aidan Eames didn't inform the government either.
Thank you, Deputy.
And these people were there supposedly to protect and defend the public interest. It's not clear either, Taoiseach, whether these tapes were provided to the Nyberg Banking Commission when it was investigating matters. So could you this morning clarify for us whether these tapes were in fact provided to the Nyberg Banking Commission? And can you tell us, please, in respect of the public interest directors politically appointed onto the bank that didn't inform the central bank about the existence for over 3 years, what of them? What questions has government asked of them, and how do you propose to proceed on this matter?
Thank you, Deputy. Taoiseach.
Well, first of all, can I say that we're all shocked and disgusted. Certainly I am by what we heard on the Anglo tapes. The arrogance, contempt, and the sheer greed of what we heard is disgusting. Knowing what we know about the damage that was done to our country by the actions of these people, I think that most people have been sickened by what they've heard on those tapes. And I think it's also true, as I've indicated earlier, that people are frustrated by the fact that it has taken so long for the full facts to come out and for the people responsible to be held to account. It's hard, I think, for people to understand why the wheels of justice have moved so slowly, or why we have not yet seen a full inquiry in public as to what happened, particularly on the night of the blanket bank guarantee. And I share that frustration. We have to accept, however, that there are complex and difficult investigations underway here. In 2009, the Office of the Director of Corporate Enforcement seized 3 million electronic documents and more than 5,000 original hard copy documents. The financial regulator compelled the production of 45,000 hard copy documents and 9 million electronic documents. And however frustrating it may be, there are good reasons why the criminal justice system is independent of politics and why the government cannot control or influence the work of the Gardaí or the DPP in these matters. As the Minister for Finance told the House yesterday, there are a number of civil and criminal cases which are currently underway. In this context, the leaking of the tapes is viewed by the Special Liquidator as a serious matter, and accordingly the Special Liquidator is investigating how the tapes came to be leaked. Given the serious cases that are underway, we have to be careful here about what we say to avoid prejudicing any criminal or civil proceedings. Now, I believe that what the government and I believe that what we have to do here in the Oireachtas is to ensure that there is a proper inquiry into the public policy issues involved, and in particular into the disastrous decision to provide Anglo with a blanket guarantee or bailout. This is the work that Minister Howlin has been doing in bringing forward the legislation, the Houses of the Oireachtas Inquiries, Privileges and Procedures Bill, to provide a solid basis for Oireachtas inquiries. It would then be a matter for the Oireachtas to constitute an inquiry as soon as possible after the bill is passed. That inquiry is the place where the questions have to be asked to directors of the bank, including the public interest directors. I believe that has to be done in public, and I believe it should be done in accordance with the legislation that Minister Howlin has before the House, which I hope will be enacted by the House this session, and I hope it will also go through the Senate, and that we can get on here with establishing that inquiry as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Taoiseach. And Dr. Mary McDonald, supplementary question.
The legislation to which you refer was actually past fifth stage last night, so you see, whatever about your claim of complexity on this matter, for lots of people this isn't complex at all. So, for instance, for people who are down at the Shelburne Hotel now, as we speak, where there is an auction, a fire sale of properties, residential and commercial, people who suffered the brunt of malpractice in the system, it's not complex at all. In fact, it's terribly simple. Some won and they lost. Now, I put to you, Taoiseach, a number of, I think, very straightforward questions that don't require the establishment of an inquiry to establish. I want to know how it is that these tapes that have to have been known to management, why there was no report to the central bank, the regulatory authority, the appropriate authority. But above all, I want to know, and I want you to find out, what the Public Interest Director was doing. Why did Alan Dukes sing dumb? I don't think that matter can wait. I think that matter needs to be established now. And without infringing on the prerogatives of any other body, I think it entirely appropriate that the government of the day would put that straight question to Mr Alan Dukes and get a straight response. We also want to know whether or not the Nyberg Banking Commission had access to these tapes. That's a simple yes or no. Either they did or they didn't.
Thank you, Deputy.
We don't need a banking inquiry to establish that. And you know, Taoiseach, that when people who are at just a slight remove from this hothouse look in and observe what's happened over the last week or more, what they see is the following: the macho antics which you have rightly described and condemned of the moolah men in the bank. And that's bad. But then they see a political system that is prepared to kick the can down the road again. In the case of Fianna Fáil, they clearly don't want to make a simple statement and reveal which bankers met which Fianna Fáil ministers. They could do that without any inquiry. And today they hear that the Public Interest Director, there to defend their interests and their stake, sang dumb on the matter of these tapes.
Thank you, Deputy.
Why was that?
Deputy McDonald.
So can you answer my questions in respect to Mr Alan Dukes? And I believe the former Senator Eames would have something to say on this matter also. Perhaps Fianna Fáil could help us out there.
Thank you, Deputy.
And then simply tell us, did Nyberg have these tapes? Yes or no?
Thank you, Deputy. Taoiseach, final reply on this question.
What I do know is that, as I've indicated, that there were a significant amount of material that was obtained from Anglo-Irish Bank. Yeah, okay. If it's okay, I'll answer the question. Yeah, thanks. There was a substantial amount of material that was obtained from Anglo-Irish Bank. Some of it was obtained in the form of court order. Some of it was seized by the Gardaí. I understand that some of that material, I don't know which particular pieces of material, were provided to Nyberg and to other investigations that were conducted. I think that the question about who knew what and what did they do about it, whether they were directors of the bank or whether they were senior managers of the bank, I think those are fair questions. And I believe that those questions need to be asked and put to the people concerned in a public forum. And that is why I believe that an inquiry along the lines which is being proposed in Deputy Howlin's legislation is the place. Please. I believe that that is where those questions need to be put and need to be answered. You are right. You are right. You are right. But these are, in many respects, very straightforward questions, and they need to be put to the people who can answer them directly and answer them to the public. Because the people, this isn't something that is for in here. This isn't an inside the bubble issue. What happened in that bank has had consequences for families all over this country who are still suffering from it. And the people who suffered those consequences, the people who are now stuck with big mortgages, the people who are stuck with businesses that went down the tubes because of the collapse in the economy, are entitled to hear directly from the people who were involved the answers to those questions. And that is why our duty here as legislators and as members of this House, and it's something that we should all share, our duty here now is not to go around picking political point scoring here or political point scoring here. Our job. No, please, if you invite me to do it, I'll remind you that you were the people the bailout to that bank. But what I believe we now need to do, is I believe that we need to establish an inquiry that gets the answers for the people of this country who have suffered far too much from the consequences of those actions, and that vehicle is provided for in the legislation that Brendan Howlin has brought before us here.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Now call on Deputy John Halligan.
Thank you, Loscan Corla. Taoiseach, another shocking but all too familiar report on children at risk of neglect was published this week. The audit of the management of neglect cases in 3 parts of the country, including my own area of Waterford, covered from 2005 to 2010 and highlighted what most TDs working in their constituencies are already aware of: the systematic and ongoing impact that staffing embargoes and lost posts within the HSE are having on children at risk. I have to say this report is a damning indictment on the previous government. The report told of vulnerable children left without an allocated social worker, despite receiving as many as 30 referrals from separate agencies, of chronic understaffing in psychological service, for instance, in Roscommon, which left 180 children waiting for up to 2 years to be seen, of caseloads often doubled on the recommended amount for a social worker. The suggestion was made that some professionals were not focused on the children's harsh everyday life because they simply used words unhygienic to describe situations such as beds saturated in urine, a complete absence of heat in houses and sometimes food in houses, and dog excrement on sitting room floors. These inherently unsafe arrangements, Taoiseach, still prevail around the country, despite what the HSE might tell you or tell me. Early this morning at 8 o'clock I spoke to a social worker who told me what's happening in areas of the country, and I spoke to 2 social workers yesterday. More than 80 cases of suspected child abuse or neglect are being reported every day to the social services, figures show. An investigation by the Ombudsman for Children found that social services failed to properly assess or follow up hundreds of reports of children at risk, abuse or neglect in a timely manner. The Ombudsman cited one case where it took 4 months to organise a home visit to a 7-year-old who was witnessing domestic violence. And another case where it took 3 months for a home visit to a 16-year-old girl where there were concerns that she was being savagely sexually abused. Taoiseach, do you agree that the overburdened HSE staff are still working in a system that is leading to poor outcomes for some children? Can you explain why the HSE are still failing to implement Children's First guidelines, which were published more than 10 years ago? And would you agree that it is unacceptable that at 4 o'clock on a Friday evening in some areas of this country there isn't a social worker available until 9 o'clock on a Monday morning, and that Gardaí in areas are having to implement Section 12s to take vulnerable children from their homes, be their social worker for the few hours until they get them to a psychiatric unit, adult psychiatric unit, until they're seen on a Monday morning.
Thank you.
Surely in the year 2013, this is unacceptable.
Margaret Taoiseach.
Lascan Corley, well, this government is acutely aware of the decades of neglect of Irish children and has sought to take real action to address the serious inadequacies that our care system has long had. I think the House needs no reminding of the horrific and systematic abuse that took place in a home in Roscommon. It shocked our nation. As the Dáil and as country, we committed to ensuring that such abuse of innocent children could and should never happen again in this country. The Roscommon Childcare Inquiry, which was published in October 2010, catalogued a number of concerns arising from the examination of the management of systematic and problematic neglect in a family which was known to the HSE Child Protection Services. Since this government was established and Minister Fitzgerald took up her role as Minister for Children and Youth Affairs in 2011, there has been a huge amount of change underway in child protection services. A new model for family-based multi-agency assessment and early intervention has already been trialled in 2 regions and is being mainstreamed as part of the establishment of the new Child and Family Agency. Last summer, shortly after the report was completed, HICWA published standards for inspection of the HSE Child and Family Services in respect of their child welfare and protective services. The Children First guidelines have been updated and the Minister is working to place the Children's First guidelines on a statutory basis. That legislation is to be published shortly. We've established the Child and Family Agency, which will be a dedicated agency with dedicated staff to work to establish national standards. With regards to the issue of social workers, the latest figures from the HSE indicate that there are currently 1,390 whole-time equivalent social workers in child and family services. This includes all 270 additional social workers who were recruited in line with the detailed recommendation of the Ryan Report Implementation Plan of 2009. The recruitment of these posts was completed in full by this government, and these posts were not subject to the public service recruitment moratorium. Social work figures are consistently in flux, with vacancies arising due to various reasons for leave and so on. However, this government is overseeing an ongoing programme of active recruitment to fill vacancies. 94 vacancies have recently been filled and a further 81 are currently being filled. And as I have said, the new programme of independent HICWA inspections is underway in line with the first ever national standards for child protection services, which has been initiated by Minister Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Taoiseach. The supplementary question, Deputy Halligan.
Thank you. I'm not one to lash out unfair criticism where it's not warranted, and I would acknowledge the increase in the number of social workers since the Ryan report that you have done. But the new care pathway system, which involves multidisciplinary teams linking up with community service, does look good on paper. It does. But, people are fed up with bureaucracy and guidelines. It's the front-line services they want. And all I can do is speak to people on the front line, like many of us do, and ask them how the service is it working, how are children being affected? And they tell me that they would acknowledge, and I'll acknowledge it, as I said, that there has been a dramatic difference. And I acknowledge the Minister for Children, the Minister for Social Protection in this, and I would be prepared to do that. There's no question in my mind about that. But based on the report that's there, based on the Ombudsman, and based on people on the frontline services, they're saying that it is still chronic, and they use the word critical. And finally, Taoiseach, I would ask you to address this unacceptable situation of weekends where kids are most vulnerable of ODing on drugs, alcohol, sexual abuse, or even suicidal tendencies. That the weekends are the area where the frontline services will tell you they need to have people present to deal with them. And if you speak to the guards, which I spoke to this morning, will tell you that they're not qualified to be brought to a house and told that a child has been beaten up or allegedly been sexually abused, and not knowing what to do over the weekend with that child. And this is happening all over the country. And I would implore you, I think you would be doing a great service if you were to consider making sure that the weekends were covered by social workers.
Taoiseach, final reply.
Yes, I do acknowledge, and first of all, can I thank Deputy Halligan for acknowledging the work of both Minister Fitzgerald and Minister Burton in this area. And I do acknowledge what he has said, that there are very real pressures on the social work services. Deputy Halligan has referred to the difficulties at weekends, but some of the pressures on the social work services are arising from an increase in the numbers of child abuse and neglect referrals to the services. Abuse referrals nationally have doubled since 2005, and the recent pilot audit of neglect cases indicates that neglect referrals in 2 areas of the country, including your own area, Deputy Halligan, had trebled in the period 2005 to 2009. Now, in response to those findings, there is a review of social work caseloads, which is being led by the HSE, and it's involving staff input, and that's nearing completion. And that review of the caseloads on social workers will inform future decision-making in relation to how the service is organised and operated. The challenges for social work services stemming from increased referrals will be further supported by the ongoing developments of new models for assessment and management of referrals, and that work is being prioritised in tandem with the establishment of the new Child and Family Agency. What I want to say to you is that what you have drawn to the attention of the House this morning is something that Minister Fitzgerald is aware of. She's already taken action. The review is, as I said, is now near completion. The Child and Family Agency is going to have a role in this, and the plan basically is that there will be a different approach taken to the assessment and management of these services, which should result. I mean, at the end of the day, what we want to have here is a better outcome for the children. I have given the figures to the House, almost 1,400 social workers who are working dedicated in the child and family area, and really what we want to ensure is that there is the best possible protection in place for children, and particularly responding to what is, I think, a disturbing increase in the number of referrals that are coming forward.
Thank you, Taoiseach.